Amazing. We have a fantastic guest with us here today, all the ways from the UK. Welcome to Gina Battye. We're going to talk a little bit about psychological safety. You have a fantastic book right here over my shoulder. So it's Authentic Organization. Congratulations. That is amazing. I'm so happy for you. And I'm just beginning to digest it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for getting a copy. Thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today.
Absolutely. So we're going to talk today about culture. We're going to talk about technically the speak up culture and what that means to folks, because not everyone understands why it's important and why we should all be doing it to be better allies and so many other reasons. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So when people think of psychological safety, they often think it is one of two things. They think that it's a speak up culture and it's around interpersonal risk taking. But that isn't what psychological safety is. There's this huge misconception that that's what it is. Psychological safety is a much bigger concept than those two things, those interpersonal risk taking and speak up culture. It's multidimensional in nature, so it's a very complex aspect of workplace culture. So let me tell you what psychological safety is, and then we'll have a little bit of a chat around the speak-up culture. So psychological safety is an individual's subjective experience of safety, comfort, and confidence within a specific context. So what that means is it refers to how safe and at ease you feel in different settings. So that might be a physical space, it might be an environment, it might be a situation, or it might be when you're interacting with other people. It incorporates many different elements, so cognitive, emotional, behavioral aspects, such as your emotional and mental well-being, your mental processes, your emotional responses, your thoughts, and the way that you behave. And one key aspect of psychological safety is feeling comfortable and confident to bring your authentic self to work if you choose to do so. So when people talk about psychological safety, as I said, often there's this misconception that it's something different, but that's quite limiting. That definition that people have in their mind is actually quite limiting. So myself and the Psychological Safety Institute, we're trying to kind of myth bust, if you like. We're trying to dispel that misconception so people can understand what it actually is and understand how they can create psychologically safe workplaces and healthy workplace cultures. So should we talk speak up culture?
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
Okay. So speak up culture, as I said, many people think that's what it is. Psychological safety revolves around that. It's actually quite misleading to think that that's all it is. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about that, just so you can kind of get an understanding of why I say that. So let's start off with what I mean by a speak up culture, because not everybody that's listening in might understand what we mean by that. So what we mean by a speak up culture is one which encourages individuals to admit mistakes, to give feedback, to take risks, to voice their opinions, and to be their authentic self without fear of any sort of repercussions, right? However, this narrow focus oversimplifies and undermines the broader and deeper aspects of psychological safety. So at the Institute, when we talk about psychological safety, we often say that psychological safety transcends these speak-up cultures and interpersonal risk-taking. It's crucial to address this misconception because whilst encouraging open communication is important, which is what you're doing when you're talking about a speak-up culture, if you focus solely on these actions without ensuring a genuinely safe environment for people, it can be counterproductive and it can exacerbate existing issues, which often leads to even more unsafe workplaces. So there's, I guess, two key points I want to make about why speak-up cultures are creating unsafe workplaces. So firstly, when you focus on speaking up, what we tend to find is organizations address superficial elements to ensure people can speak up. So they're not creating that safe environment for them to be comfortable to do so. They're literally just saying, you know, here's a couple of key things you need to be aware of. Right, let's go. Let's all speak up. You know, it's not as easy as that, I'm afraid. No. Now, many companies are also focusing on using these anonymous reporting tools, or they're emphasizing intangible concepts like building trust or respect. They're pushing this narrative around, okay, everyone, let's start to build some trust. Let's build respect. Let's do this. Now, while all these efforts are well-intentioned, they on their own are inadequate and they fail to ensure real safety. Asking employees to voice their concerns in an unsafe, a negative, or a toxic environment undermines their ability to do so effectively. And without a sense of safety, individuals will just not speak up. However much you tell them to, they're just not going to do it because they don't feel safe, right?
Absolutely.
So you need to create a psychologically safe environment. You can't speak up if you don't feel safe. Without laying the groundwork, promoting that speak up culture sets people up to fail. And as I've already mentioned, it exacerbates that already unsafe workplace. And I think the speak up culture misconception, I think it's crucial to dispel this misleading narrative because it is exacerbating issues within organizations. The second thing I want to mention around speak up cultures is by asking people to speak up, you're assuming that they've got all of these skills, right? Intrapersonal awareness. So that means being aware of their own thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Not everybody has that. We're thinking that people have got interpersonal and communication skills. We're thinking that they've got an understanding of their team dynamics within a strong, healthy team culture. We're expecting that that's already there, right? We're thinking that people have got a safe space to speak into and that they've got the necessary feedback skills to give feedback to other people. But let's face it, right? Most people don't have those skills, do they? And if they do, they're at very different levels. So you're expecting people to speak up without providing the resources, the training, or the safe space for people to practice those skills. Organizations must establish the foundational elements that employees need to be able to have that speak up culture. So things like the confidence and safety for employees to bring their authentic self to work. They need to have effective communication skills to speak up confidently and safely. They need a safe space for healthy dialogue and conflict resolution skills for addressing any issues that come up. Without these kind of foundational elements, organizations are setting people up to fail. You can't bypass these essentials, but unfortunately, many organizations want to. They just want to get into, right, let's create this speak up culture. Now, if you cultivate a psychologically safe and healthy culture, people will naturally speak up. Okay, they'll feel safe and able to do so. Forcing it without laying that groundwork, is only going to lead to failure. So, to wrap up, in reality, psychological safety encompasses much more than a speak-up culture and that interpersonal risk-taking. It includes intrapersonal awareness, developing interpersonal and communication skills. You need to understand team dynamics. You need to be able to create safe and inclusive spaces. You'll be wanting to promote collaboration, innovation, and creativity. And it involves creating an environment where individuals and teams can thrive, where they feel valued and they're empowered to contribute effectively. That's what a psychologically safe environment looks like. Hope that helps in terms of understanding that speak-up culture and why it's not such a great thing to actually promote unless you've got all of the underlying foundations already in place.
Right. So I guess when we do work in this area with organizations, you're right. I guess a lot just feel it's that, I think, misunderstanding of people have the knowledge, they have the communication, they have the training, they have that foundational piece that you talked about to be able to do all of these things. And honestly, most people don't. They don't have the effective communication skills. They don't have maybe the wherewithal about how they communicate. And of course, we all communicate and receive communications differently. So laying that foundational work is tremendously important, and not expecting people just speak up, because if you speak up, you get what you need. And of course, we both know that that's not the case, is it, in organizations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I wish it was, I wish we could just kind of say to people, let's create this speak up culture. Let's just all do it, and in an ideal world, yes, that would happen. Okay. But I guess there's kind of two different things going on here for me. particularly, and why I feel so strongly about this. It's because, first of all, people believe that that's what psychological safety is, when actually it's not. It's such a much bigger concept and area of work. And I guess the second thing, like we've already said, is pushing this narrative of let's create a speak up culture. But actually, you're going to make it a lot worse if you don't have those foundations in place for people. So it's just being mindful of that, really, and thinking about, okay, if we do want a speak up culture, then what can we do right now to think about how we encourage people to bring their authentic self to work? You know, how do we make sure people feel safe and confident to do that? And how do we make sure everybody's got the communication skills that they need? And how do we work with teams to make sure that they understand each other's preferences and boundaries and that kind of good stuff, personalities? It's putting those foundations in place and thinking, how can we get to that point of a speak up culture instead of just going, right, let's do it. Right, we're going to throw everything at it. Let's just do it. Everybody's going to speak up right now. Let's go.
Yeah. Like you, I wish that was the case and it was easy for that to happen. But, you know, we know within organizations, there's different historically excluded folks. Like we're part of the historically excluded, we're part of the queer, the gay. You know, and, you know, we don't always bring, I remember not always bringing my full authentic self to workplaces because I didn't feel that safer space to be able to do it, to be able to put a picture of my loved one, my wife on my desk, to be able to, you know, talk about, and there's a lot of hiding and covering of my true identity. And, you know, that plays havoc, I think, on a lot of us that aren't able to bring that full authentic selves, kind of stripping back who it is we want to be instead of that masking, covering piece that you talk a great deal about. And I love it, by the way, in your book, the masking, covering, it's, you know, it's there and it's present for a lot of us. So any thoughts on that? Any kind of helpful hints of boundaries, how to set boundaries, how to look at that whole masking piece?
Yeah, I've got tons of thoughts on this. You're going to regret asking that question. I can tell you now.
I know.
The authentic self piece is for me the most important part of the 5 pillars of psychological safety. And I mean, we can talk about that later if you'd like. But authentic self for me is huge, because when we talk about different levels of culture within an organization, often organizations think there's just one culture, but actually there's 5 different levels of culture within an organization. And the first one is the personal culture. So that is about how you show up in the workplace. So it's about your beliefs, your attitudes, your values, and your behaviors. So when we talk about personal culture, we're talking about personal accountability and responsibility. We're talking about emotional intelligence, self-awareness, coping mechanisms, individuals like work ethics, that's hard to say, and motivation. So when we talk about culture at the 5 levels, it all hinges on that first level. If people are showing up in the workplace and they don't have those skills that I just mentioned and those insights about themselves, then they're going to show up through their identity instead of their authentic self. And there's 2 very different ways people show up in the workplace, but you'll tend to find people show up with their identity rather than their authentic self. So what we mean by identity is, how can I start this? No, actually, let's start with what your authentic self is, right? So your authentic self, I want you to imagine, right, that you've literally just been born. Now, most people struggle with that. So if you're struggling with that, think about you've just bought a new phone, for instance. Factory settings, it's super clean, super squeaky, runs really smoothly, there's no bugs. So that is what I would class as your authentic self, okay? Showing up as your natural self. Now, over time, things happen to us. People label us different things. You know, you might have certain workplace experiences that affect how you show up, not just in the workplace, but in general in your life. You'll start to hide certain parts of yourself. You might start to cover certain parts of yourself. You might mask certain elements of yourselves in different situations with different people. We all do it, by the way. You don't have to be part of a marginalized community to not bring your authentic self to work. I have to say that up front. So literally everybody does it in the workplace. We all hide certain elements of ourselves because we don't want people to know certain things about us. But what you're actually doing there is you're presenting your identity. So your identity is like all of the things that you've amassed over the years that have kind of hidden your true self, your authentic self. So you're showing up as this version of yourself that you've honed over years to fit in. Okay. So as I said, most people show up through their identity rather than through their authentic self. So what does that mean in the workplace? Well, what that means is people are not seeing the real you. They're seeing the you that you want them to see, the perception of you. Okay, they've got this perception of you. Now, a lot of issues stem in the workplace because people aren't bringing their authentic self to work. Okay, so imagine you're in a scenario. Well, I'll give you my scenario actually, because then it might kind of help to picture what can happen in a workplace, I guess, right? So imagine this, right? So one of my first jobs was teaching, right? So I would be in the staff room. You can imagine it, loads of teachers all coming together to have the lunch, right? You can imagine, right? So I'm not out in the workplace. People don't know about my sexuality. They don't know about my partner. They don't know about anything in my private life because I don't want them to know, because I'm working in an environment that is very toxic, that there's a lot of homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, it's like 20 years ago. So I'm in the workplace, little old me, like eating my lunch. All these people descend on me and they all start talking about their personal life. And I get really uncomfortable because I don't want to disclose anything about my personal life. So I eat my lunch super quickly, head down, and I go out of the door. And I stay out of that room until I know that conversation has finished, because I don't want to reveal anything about what I'm doing at the weekend, what I did last weekend, what I'm doing for my holidays, who I'm seeing, that kind of stuff. I just don't want people to know that stuff. So I'd go out of the staff room, I'd mess around for a bit, I'd come back in. If they were still talking about it, I'd shuffle some papers, pretend I'm looking for something, and walk back out again, because I don't want people to know anything about me, right? This happens in the workplace, I'm telling you now, okay? You might not know people are feeling uncomfortable with certain conversations, but they are, okay? So in terms of, you asked about strategies and things people can think about and do around being their authentic self. I guess there's a couple of key things. One is about being mindful of the people that you're with. So you might think that people are being their authentic self with you. You don't know what they're hiding. You don't know what they're masking, what they're censoring. So just be a bit, become aware of that. Just acknowledge that not everybody is going to tell you everything. And there might be different reasons for that, okay? It's not for you to find out those reasons, to dig into it, just to accept it, okay? So the second thing that you can do is around raising your own self-awareness. So think yourself in a workplace situation, who are you your authentic self with? Who do you show up as your most authentic self with? And who don't you show up with? And what's the difference between those people or those situations that you find yourself in? When you start to think about these kind of things, you start to look at that situation and think, well, why is it I don't feel safe in that situation? What is it about that situation that makes me not want to bring more of my authentic self into that scenario? And when you start thinking about that, you might actually realize that with certain people, actually, you do feel comfortable. You've just got into the habit of not bringing certain elements of yourself. So it might be a case of, you've got a specific group of people that actually you feel really comfortable with, and you might feel comfortable sharing certain aspects of yourself with them. It might feel a bit uncomfortable at first because you've not done it for a while, but the minute that you start talking about the things that you do feel comfortable talking to them about, they will kind of feel a change in the relationship between either the pair of you or the group of you, because you're letting your barriers down and you're letting people in. And it's not to say that you're vulnerable. It's not to say that you're sharing things that you don't want to share, because you should never do that. You should be very clear about the things that you do want to share and the things that you don't want to share. Obviously, you can share the stuff that you do want to share, but the things you don't want to share, have a line, get it ready. Do you know what? I don't want to talk about that today, or I just don't want to talk about that in general. Simply saying that, people will respect it and start talking about something different. Okay, so it's being aware of your boundaries, it's about raising your awareness, and it's about being aware of other people around you and thinking about how they might feel in certain situations too. That was a lot. Sorry.
No, that's great.
I told you I could talk a lot about that.
Yeah, so you should. You've done a lot of research, and you've had a lot of, interviews and a lot of comments and a lot of training. So you're going to have a lot about it. So you're an expert in this. So I appreciate that. So a takeaway for me when I read that last night about authentic self was know where people's barriers are, or don't try to push through their barriers if you're feeling uncomfortableness with that. Because a lot of times we have conversations about, what are you doing this weekend? And you use the appropriate language of, partner, family, chosen family, whatever language we're going to use to be inclusive. And if this person doesn't say anything, it's okay, right? Like, we've included them in conversation, not to go back to them and say, hey, you didn't tell me what you're doing the weekend, if you've given that opportunity. So, because I think sometimes we go through that barrier, then we're making it unsafe for that person for whatever reason, of whatever things they don't want to share, or masking or hiding. It's their personal stuff. And we need to understand that not everyone is going to be an open book within workplaces. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that people aren't going to be very open with people in the workplace. It could be things like they've had a previous experience in the workplace that was really bad, and they don't want to relive that experience again. It could be that their conditioning is a big thing. So conditioning is, it begins with the moment that you're born, basically. It shapes your beliefs and your behaviors before you even realize it. So conditioning has a huge impact on how you show up, not just in the workplace, but in life in general. So imagine, right, that I personally experienced loads of messaging when I was younger around being LGBTQ or being gay is not a good thing. So at the time, Section 28 in the UK was here when I was growing up. The AIDS crisis was hitting in the 80s. There was so much negativity in the press about it, so many awful campaigns about it. Honestly, it was truly awful. But as a young person growing up with that, the messaging that I was hearing and seeing and experiencing from people was, it's bad, it's wrong, it's immoral, you shouldn't be gay, it's the worst thing that you could ever do, don't do it. Like it's a choice, right?
Right.
Oh, God, if only. But when you grow up with those kind of messages, or any kind of messages really, that are negative and against who you are as a person, and you might not realize it at the time, obviously, but when you grow up with those kind of messages, or any kind of messages, that has an impact on you, on how you show up in different situations. So conditioning is a huge thing for people. Personalities can affect different people in terms of safety as well. So imagine that you've got somebody who is very dominating in conversations, and then you've got somebody who's quite quiet, quite laid back. They don't really challenge very much. When those two personalities come together, it could be like fireworks, right? So one person might feel really, really uncomfortable in a conversation. I'll let you guess who that person might be. And the other person would be quite domineering in that conversation. But different personalities affect levels of safety, as do power dynamics within a relationship. So, I mean, there's hundreds of different reasons, and there's just a few in terms of things that make people feel unsafe. Hope that's helpful to kind of get a bit of an understanding of why people might not show up as their authentic self, and why they might mask certain elements of themselves. There's just so many. I'd be here all day if I tried to go through them all with you.
Absolutely. I think that's a great place to kind of end this piece of the discussion on psychological safety and culture and what that looks like. If people want to connect with you after this first episode, how's the best way that they can connect with you and look you up?
Yeah, great question. So to get in touch with me personally, the best place is LinkedIn. So if you search for my name, it's Gina Battye. I think there's only one of me, as far as I know. Feel free to connect. Feel free to send me a message if you've got any questions, any thoughts. I'm always really keen to hear it. I'm very engaged on LinkedIn. So yeah, feel free to connect with me over there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to do this episode 1 with you.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on.